Veronica Hale moved through the terminal at San Francisco International Airport with a kind of grace that came from years of practice. Her heels clicked confidently across the polished floor, her navy blazer unwrinkled, her platinum hair pulled into a tight, elegant chignon. Her carry-on, a sleek designer roller in cream and gold, glided beside her like it knew exactly where it was going. To anyone watching, she looked like a woman in complete control. This flight, San Francisco to Boston, was one she'd taken dozens of times before. She could practically recite the flight attendant's script before they even spoke it. First-class boarding, champagne on arrival, a neatly folded newspaper placed just so on her tray table. The people in this section didn't ask too many questions. They worked, they slept, they occasionally nodded at each other like members of a private club, and Veronica had always felt like she belonged. As she approached the gate, she gave a small smile to the attendant scanning boarding passes. Group 1, the woman said automatically, barely glancing up. Veronica didn't mind. She liked that she didn't need to be noticed. Her presence was understood. She walked down the jet bridge with the silent satisfaction of someone who expected comfort, who had paid for it, and who knew what was waiting for her at the end. Until she turned into row 3. Her seat was 3A window, but her eyes didn't go there first. They landed instead on the man already seated in 3B. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark navy suit that looked expertly tailored. A silver watch peeked out from beneath his cuff as he typed effortlessly on a slim black laptop. His posture was relaxed, but there was a quiet precision to every movement, like nothing he did was by accident. His skin was deep brown, smooth. His eyes scanned the screen in front of him, completely unfazed by the boarding chaos around him. Veronica's steps faltered, just for a moment, not enough for anyone to notice. But in her mind, something jolted. A black man in first class. Alone, unbothered. She blinked and resumed walking, but her grip on her carry-on tightened. She stopped beside her row, gave a quick, polite nod, and lifted her bag into the overhead bin with more force than necessary. The metal latch clacked as she slammed it shut. The man didn't flinch. He didn't even look up. Veronica eased into her seat with a tight smile, adjusting her jacket. Her tote bag settled neatly on her lap. From the corner of her eye, she studied him. Not directly, of course. Just enough to observe. He wasn't talking on the phone. He wasn't listening to loud music. He wasn't eating or manspreading or doing anything obnoxious. In fact, he was ideal, silent, focused, and yet something about his presence, about how he took up space, so completely without asking for permission, pricked at her. It wasn't how first class usually felt. It wasn't predictable. He didn't offer a smile. He didn't acknowledge her arrival. There was no awkward small talk, no polite, "Hope we have a smooth flight" exchange. Just a rhythmic sound of keys clicking beneath his fingers, and a quiet hum of confidence that radiated from his seat like a silent challenge. She straightened in her chair and glanced forward. The flight crew was still welcoming passengers. A few people were lingering in the aisle. She adjusted her seatbelt and glanced again. His eyes were locked on a screen. Whatever he was reading or writing, it had his full attention. Her purse shifted slightly, nudging the shared armrest between them. No reaction. Her brows knit together for a split second. She sat taller, her back against the headrest, and inhaled through her nose. This wasn't how it was supposed to feel. First class was supposed to be seamless, curated, comfortable. And right now, despite the silence, despite the apparent peace, she wasn't comfortable. She turned her head fully toward him the first time, her voice crisp, polite. "Excuse me," she said. He paused, fingers hovering mid-sentence. He turned just slightly, eyebrows raised in acknowledgement. Veronica offered a tight smile. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" The question hung there, light, non-threatening, but with a razor edge hidden beneath the surface. His reply was immediate, calm. "Yes." No elaboration. He turned back to his laptop without another glance. That was it. Veronica opened her mouth, then closed it. She smoothed her skirt and folded her hands over her lap, suddenly aware of how quiet the space between them had become. She stared out the window, though there was nothing to see. Her reflection stared back, poised, polished, but unsettled. Not because he had said anything wrong, but because he had said nothing at all. And for Veronica Hale, that silence was the loudest thing in the cabin. Veronica tried to focus on her breathing. In, out, smooth, controlled. She had done this flight dozens of times. She knew the flight time. She knew which terminal in Boston she'd land at. She knew the menu choices by heart. She even knew how long it took for the champagne to arrive after takeoff. But none of that familiarity comforted her now, because something about this wasn't right. It wasn't the seat. It wasn't the temperature. It wasn't even the turbulence that hadn't yet arrived. It was him, Marcus Avery. She didn't know his name yet, but she'd later learn it, burned into her memory like a scar she couldn't explain to others without sounding petty or worse. For now, he was just a black man beside her who refused to shrink, to smile, or to explain himself. He didn't make small talk. He didn't acknowledge her presence with even a nod. He existed there, fully and confidently, as if his seat had been waiting for him all along. And that, more than anything, rattled Veronica. She stared ahead. The plane continued boarding behind them, muffled voices, the occasional clatter of overhead compartments opening and closing, the beeping of a boarding scanner. She heard the gentle banter of two men in suits seated across the aisle. A woman in pearls was settling into 2A with a neck pillow already in place. But none of that registered like the presence next to her. It was the way he sat, upright, but not stiff, engaged in his work, not with her. It was a glow of the laptop screen, reflecting softly against the skin. It was a fact that he didn't perform gratitude for being there. He didn't make himself smaller or more agreeable. He wasn't trying to fit in. He already had. And that made her feel like maybe she didn't. That realization sent a subtle flush to her cheeks. She adjusted her posture, crossed her legs, then uncrossed them. She glanced sideways, just long enough to see his fingers fly across the keyboard. Whatever he was typing, he was focused, sharp, present. She cleared her throat, soft but intentional. He didn't react. That irritated her. Veronica prided herself on her ability to read people, to manage energy in a room. It was part of what made her successful in corporate fundraising. She could walk into a boardroom and know, instantly, who needed a smile, a compliment, a bit of praise to feel seen. She could charm, disarm, and command. But here, she was invisible to him, and that was unacceptable. She turned slightly toward him, her voice sliding into that familiar tone of polite condescension that had served her well in country clubs and charity galas alike. "Excuse me," she said, her words dipped in velvet. This time he paused. His fingers stopped moving. His shoulders didn't tense. He simply turned his head a fraction, just enough to show he was listening. Veronica smiled, tight, professional. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" The question landed gently in the space between them, but it wasn't really a question. Not in the way it was phrased. Not with the tilt of her head. Not with the practiced tone of faux concern. It was a probe, a challenge, a veiled accusation wrapped in courtesy. Marcus looked at her, expression unreadable. His eyes met hers, steady and calm. No anger, no annoyance, but also no apology. "Yes," he said. Just one word. Firm. Final. He turned back to his laptop. And that was it. Veronica's smile wavered for half a second. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected him to be so certain. Most people, when questioned in that way, responded with a little sheepishness. A quick check of the ticket. A flustered laugh. Maybe even a small, "Oh, of course, let me double check." But not him. He didn't explain. He didn't reassure her. He didn't even ask why she was questioning him. He just claimed his space, confirmed his place, and resumed his work. And that made her feel something she couldn't quite name. Not fear, but a loss of control. She sat back, trying to maintain composure. She could feel the heat prickling at the back of her neck. Not from embarrassment, not exactly, but from something more primal. Something knotted deep inside her that she had never really confronted. This wasn't how these interactions were supposed to go. People usually softened under that tone. They deferred. They smiled politely, tried to appease, tried to keep the peace. But this man didn't. He didn't need to. And that scared her more than she was willing to admit. She turned back toward the window, jaw tight, out on the tarmac. The baggage crew moved beneath the plane like ants. She watched them without really seeing. Her mind was racing, recalculating. One thing was certain. She wasn't done. Not yet. Veronica stared out the window, but the outside world wasn't what she was focused on. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glass, pale against the dull gray of the tarmac. Her face looked composed, polished, but beneath the surface, something tightened in her chest. She was trying to make sense of it, of him, of the small rupture he had created in what was supposed to be a predictable flight. It wasn't just a one-word answer. It was the way he'd given it, without any hint of anxiety or apology. That calm, that confidence. It grated at her in a way she couldn't articulate without sounding absurd, maybe even prejudiced. But this wasn't about race. At least, she didn't think so. No, this was about tone, about decorum, about what people do and say when they're in a shared space, when they're civilized. She stole another glance at him. He was back to typing. Focused. Silent. That silence had become a problem. It wasn't aggressive or dismissive. It was worse. It was self-assured. It said, I don't owe you anything. Not even a performance of politeness. She adjusted her seatbelt and shifted in her chair. The armrest between them was still up. She reached for it and gently slid it down, creating a boundary. He didn't react. Didn't even look. That burned more than a raised eyebrow ever could. Her tote bag was still on her lap, slightly pressed against her abdomen. She fumbled inside, pretending to look for something, lip balm, a pack of gum, anything, to give her hand something to do. She could feel her pulse in her fingers. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She reached up and pressed the call button. The overhead chime rang out softly. The man didn't react, but she knew he'd heard it, and so did the lead flight attendant. Chloe appeared within seconds. Mid-30s, sharp uniform, neat ponytail, and a practiced smile. She leaned in with professional warmth. Is everything all right, ma'am? She asked, eyes flicking briefly between Veronica and the man beside her. Veronica gave a small laugh. Light. Social. The kind that said this is probably nothing, but I'm saying something anyway. I think there might be a little mix-up with the seating, she said, gesturing vaguely toward Marcus. Chloe's expression didn't shift. She pulled out her tablet and tapped a few times, scanning the manifest. Then she looked up. Nope. Mr. Avery is in 3B. You're in 3A. Everything's correct, she said with the kind of pleasant finality that ended most conversations. Veronica blinked once. Her fingers curled lightly around the edges of her tote. Oh, she said, offering another tight-lipped smile. I just thought, well, I assumed. Her voice trailed off. Chloe nodded politely. It happens. Then came the pause. Not from Chloe, but from Veronica. She hadn't expected it to be that easy, so, matter of fact, she thought there'd be a flicker of uncertainty, maybe a moment where Chloe said, let me double check. But no, just a quick glance at the screen and a firm answer. And now, worse than being wrong, she felt dismissed. She turned back toward the window, brushing the loose hair from her forehead. Well, mistakes happen, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Chloe lingered for a moment, then glanced toward Marcus. He looked up just briefly and gave a single nod, acknowledgement, not apology. Let me know if you need anything else, Chloe said before stepping away. Veronica didn't respond. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same as before. Now it was heavier. Now it carried meaning. Marcus returned to his typing, unbothered. But Veronica wasn't. She could feel the imbalance now. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had evaporated. She didn't like that. She tapped her fingers against her knee. He hadn't been rude. Hadn't raised his voice. Hadn't even looked at her for more than 3 seconds at a time. And still, she felt challenged. And that was the part that truly disturbed her. Because for all her professionalism, for all her curated image and poised posture, something inside her had cracked. And it wasn't him who'd done it. It was her own discomfort, with his presence, with his silence, with her inability to control either. And now the question hung in the air, not the one she had asked, but the one behind it. Who gets to belong here? The plane was now nearly full. Passengers shuffled down the aisle, cramming bags into overhead compartments, bumping into armrests with muttered apologies. Flight attendants offered tight smiles and firm reminders to please take your seat. The engines hummed with that familiar pre-takeoff thrum, vibrating lightly through the floor. But in row 3, the real turbulence was just beginning. Veronica Hale sat perfectly still, her posture elegant but rigid, like a statue carved out of habit and tension. Her legs were crossed tightly at the knee. One hand rested gently atop the other on her lap, fingers interlocked like she was preparing for prayer or battle. Next to her, Marcus Avery typed, undisturbed by the flurry around them. He hadn't spoken since his one-word confirmation. He hadn't looked her way. His attention remained laser-focused on a laptop screen, the keys clicking in soft, rhythmic bursts. It was a sound of efficiency, of discipline, of someone who had absolutely nothing to prove. And that sound grated on her. It wasn't a noise that bothered her. It was what it meant. It meant he wasn't thinking about her, wasn't wondering what she thought of him, wasn't adjusting himself to ease her discomfort. He simply existed, on his own terms. That was the part she couldn't shake. Because that presence, his quiet, undeniable presence, was pushing against something in her that she hadn't had to confront before. Ownership. This seat. This cabin. This airspace. It was supposed to feel like hers. For years, Veronica had walked into first class like she walked into her office or a country club, assured, accepted, safe. Everyone looked like her, moved like her. She had grown used to the soft certainty that she belonged. But now, with Marcus seated beside her, unmoved by her presence, unfazed by her subtle cues, she felt unmoored, uncomfortable, and she hated that word. Uncomfortable wasn't supposed to apply to her. She was the one who made others comfortable, by speaking well, dressing well, smiling just enough but not too much. She knew how to manage people, how to navigate tension before it ever surfaced. So why couldn't she manage this? She glanced at him again, quick but searching. His brow furrowed slightly as he focused on whatever he was typing. He was leaning slightly forward, intent, his fingers dancing over the keyboard with ease. Her gaze drifted to his wrist. The watch was sleek, professional, subtle luxury, not flashy. It matched his suit, his demeanor, understated but meticulous. Everything about him said, I belong here. And yet, Veronica couldn't accept it, because he hadn't asked for her approval, because he didn't need it. She shifted in her seat, uncrossing and recrossing her legs. She reached for her water bottle, unscrewed the cap, and took a sip she didn't need. Anything to reset, anything to control the moment. But the moment didn't move. It just sat there between them, dense and quiet and unresolved. She swallowed, then slowly reached for the call button again. Ding! The chime sounded above, soft and non-threatening. But it wasn't soft in meaning. This wasn't the call of a passenger who needed water or a blanket. This was something else. From across the aisle, a businessman in his 50s looked up from his phone, eyebrows raised in vague curiosity. A few rows back, someone paused mid-conversation, instinctively glancing forward. Veronica didn't notice them. She was too busy rehearsing her next move. This time, she wasn't going to dance around it. She didn't want to ask another question. She wanted action. She wanted to reclaim her space. Moments later, Chloe appeared again, just as composed as the first time. She leaned in, lowering her voice so as not to disturb the nearby passengers. Yes, ma'am? Is there something I can help you with? Veronica smiled, measured, polite, and purposeful. I'd like to request a seat change, she said evenly. Chloe blinked once. Oh, is something wrong with the seat? Veronica hesitated for just a breath, then gave a tiny shake of her head, her voice lowering. No, it's not the seat, she said carefully. It's just, I'm not comfortable sitting here. The words were smooth. Practice, chosen with care. But underneath that calm exterior, her heartbeat quickened. She was doing it. She was making the ask. And the truth was, she didn't know what she expected to happen next. Maybe for Chloe to nod sympathetically. Maybe for someone to notice. Maybe for Marcus to flinch or ask why. Maybe for some confirmation that she wasn't overreacting. But none of that happened. Chloe's smile faltered, barely but noticeably. She looked down at her tablet, tapped a few times. "I'll see if we have any open seats," she said, her tone still professional but noticeably cooler. Veronica nodded, as if this were a routine customer service request. But Chloe wasn't moving quickly. Her eyes flicked toward Marcus for a split second before returning to her screen. And in that moment, Veronica realized that whatever sympathy she expected wasn't coming. This wasn't going to be as easy as it had been in other places, other contexts. Because here, 35,000 feet in the air, in a pressurized tube with strangers watching, discomfort wasn't enough. Veronica smoothed the hem of her skirt, pretending not to notice the shift in tone. Chloe tapped once more and looked up. "I'll let you know shortly," she said, then disappeared down the aisle. Veronica sat back, heartbeat in her ears. She had said what she needed to say. And yet, nothing felt resolved. Because deep down she knew she hadn't said what she really meant. Not yet. The seat beneath Veronica Hale felt suddenly harder. She shifted, subtly, as if her discomfort might be solved by adjusting the angle of her hips. But it wasn't physical. It was something deeper, something beginning to fray beneath the fabric of civility she wore so carefully. The minutes since Chloe walked away had dragged on like hours. Marcus Avery remained silent, still and, infuriatingly, unbothered. He hadn't looked her way, hadn't asked what the call button was about, hadn't even raised an eyebrow. That silence, more than any word, dug into her. Because Veronica wasn't used to being invisible, especially not to someone sitting less than 6 inches from her elbow. In her world, presence was acknowledged, greeted, affirmed, nodded to. But Marcus? He refused to validate her unease, refused to soften, refused to play the game. And that somehow made her feel erased. She glanced around the cabin. The aisle had cleared now. Everyone was seated. A flight attendant gave a last check before takeoff. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. That usual hush, the one just before wheels leave the ground, settled over space like a velvet curtain. But in row 3, tension buzzed like static. Veronica's eyes darted toward the front of the plane, then to the ceiling panel where the call button had already dimmed. She could still feel the pressure of her finger where it had pressed it minutes before. And then, as if summoned by the weight of expectation, Chloe returned. She leaned in, her smile thinner than before. "I checked the seating chart," she said quietly. "Unfortunately, we're at full capacity in first class today." Veronica inhaled, slow and deliberate. "I see," she said, lips pursed. "What about coach?" Chloe tilted her head slightly. "There are 2 open seats in economy." Veronica didn't hesitate. "Perfect," she said, voice clipped but controlled. "He can take one of them." The sentence dropped like a stone. For a moment, Chloe didn't speak. Her brows rose just a fraction, her eyes narrowing, not in aggression, but in calculation. The kind of gaze people give when they're double-checking what they just heard. Across the aisle, a businessman paused mid-scroll on his phone. The woman 2 rows back, who had been reading a paperback, now sat unusually still. Marcus still hadn't moved, but the hum of the cabin changed. Veronica could feel it, that collective pause, that tiny, invisible shift of attention, like people leaning in without leaning forward. Chloe's voice, when it came, was careful, but firmer than before. "Just to clarify," she said, "you'd like me to move him to economy?" Veronica straightened slightly in her seat, drawing herself up with practiced poise. "I think that would be best, yes," she replied, adding a soft smile, as if this were a reasonable compromise. Chloe's silence stretched just a beat too long. "Then may I ask why?" And there it was. The question Veronica didn't want to answer. Not honestly, because the honest answer was ugly. The honest answer wasn't something you could say aloud, not without consequences. So instead, she leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. I just don't feel comfortable, she said, carefully enunciating each word. Chloe didn't blink. Is he doing anything to make you uncomfortable? No, Veronica said quickly. Nothing specific. It's just a feeling. A presence thing. A presence thing. Even she wasn't sure what that meant. Chloe drew in a slow breath through her nose. If there's no specific behavior causing concern, I can't ask another passenger to move from their assigned seat, especially to a lower class. Veronica's lips thinned. This is a simple request, she said, quieter now but sharper. If someone doesn't feel safe, shouldn't that be accommodated? Chloe's face remained unreadable. Are you saying you feel unsafe, ma'am? Veronica hesitated. That was the moment, the point of no return. She could have walked it back. She could have said, no, I misspoke. She could have diffused it. But the eyes on her, real or imagined, were too much. Pride too sharp. Ego too bruised. She tilted her head, giving the smallest shrug. I'm not saying that, she replied. I just don't feel comfortable. That's all. Across the aisle, the businessman exhaled through his nose. A soft, sarcastic humph. A few rows back, a phone tilted slightly upward, recording. Veronica felt her throat tighten. She glanced toward Marcus. He wasn't typing now. He wasn't looking at Chloe. He was looking at her. Directly. Calm. Still. Waiting. And in his eyes, she saw something terrifying. Not anger. Not fear. But clarity. He knew exactly what she was doing. And he wasn't going to stop her. The air in the cabin had changed. It wasn't colder. It wasn't louder. But it felt charged like the moments before thunderstorm, where everything is still but alive with tension. Veronica Hale smoothed the hem of her blouse for the third time, her fingers trembling just enough to annoy her. Across from her, the businessman who had been silently observing now shifted in his seat, trying and failing to pretend he wasn't listening. Behind her, she could sense the quiet attention of others. Passengers who just moments ago were flipping through in-flight magazines or answering emails now sat still, tuned into the growing energy in row 3. And yet, beside her, Marcus Avery had barely moved. The black man she was trying so hard to make disappear remained exactly where he was. Hands resting calmly on his laptop, eyes steady, expression unreadable. It was as if he were waiting for her to finish her little performance. Chloe, the lead flight attendant, stood firm between them. Her tablet was still in her hands, but she wasn't tapping anything. She wasn't trying to help anymore. She was just watching now, watching Veronica squirm beneath the weight of her own careful words. I just think it would be best if one of us moved, Veronica said, her voice now low, taut. There's no reason we have to make this a bigger issue. Chloe gave a slow, deliberate nod. I understand, ma'am, but the only available seats are in economy. Would you like me to arrange that for you? Veronica blinked. I meant for him. She didn't say Marcus's name, didn't look at him, just gestured vaguely in his direction, as if he were luggage to be relocated. A ripple moved through the cabin. Not loud, not overt, but visible. A woman in row 4 lowered her phone slightly. A man across the aisle leaned toward his wife and whispered something. A teenager 2 rows back adjusted her AirPods, but didn't press play. People were watching. And now, they weren't just watching a woman request a seat change. They were watching a situation unfold. Chloe inhaled through her nose. Ma'am, she said evenly, Mr. Avery has a first-class ticket. He's in his assigned seat. I can't and won't move him without cause. Veronica's jaw tightened. Her shoulders rose slightly, a silent brace against the rising pressure. But I'm the one who's uncomfortable. You've expressed that, yes, Chloe said. But discomfort alone isn't grounds for relocating another passenger, especially not to a lower class. Veronica's lips parted to respond, but Chloe cut her off, gently but firmly. If you're willing to take a seat in economy, I'm happy to accommodate you. Economy. The word hit like a slap. Veronica's eyes flashed. That's not acceptable. Chloe didn't flinch. Then I'll ask that you remain in your assigned seat. We're preparing for takeoff. Veronica sat back, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. Her skin felt hot, her chest tight. Her breath came faster now, as if the air itself was refusing to cooperate. She could feel it, the control slipping away. And the worst part? He still hadn't said a word. Marcus hadn't raised his voice, hadn't argued, hadn't even defended himself. He just sat there, still composed in place, like a mirror, quietly reflecting everything back at her. That stillness infuriated her more than any reaction would have. If he had shouted, she could have been afraid. If he had argued, she could have claimed conflict. If he had begged, maybe she could have found sympathy. But he had done none of those things. He had remained exactly as he was. And that made her feel like the unreasonable one. She glanced sideways at him again. This time, his gaze met hers. Direct, level, not accusing, not challenging. Just there, present, unafraid. Veronica quickly looked away. She reached for her tote bag again, fumbling with the zipper, pretending to look for something. Her hands were shaking now, the edges of her composure frayed. Why won't he just say something? Across the aisle, the businessman now stared openly. He didn't hide it anymore. Neither did the couple 2 rows ahead, who had turned slightly in their seats. Even Chloe seemed to be watching her more than listening. Veronica felt boxed in not by walls, but by truth. The truth that she had pushed too far. The truth that her discomfort had become a performance, and the audience was no longer on her side. But she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She pressed the call button again. The soft chime rang overhead. Marcus didn't flinch. But this time, Chloe didn't return right away. There was a pause, a deliberate delay, as if everyone knew what was coming next, and they were all silently daring her to say it. The call button's chime was soft, but the silence that followed it wasn't. It hung thick in the cabin, a silence that was no longer polite or comfortable. It was charged, like everyone knew something was about to happen, but no one was going to be the first to speak. Except Veronica. Chloe returned, this time slower, her posture a touch stiffer. The smile that once graced her lips had faded into something more neutral, more guarded. Her eyes no longer bounced back and forth between the passengers like a hostess keeping the peace. Now, they locked directly on Veronica. "Yes, ma'am," she asked. Her tone was firm, stripped of the customer service warmth it once held. Veronica leaned in slightly, her voice quiet but no longer soft. "I need to speak with someone in charge," she said. "The head crew member, or the pilot." Chloe blinked. There it was. Passengers who hadn't been paying attention earlier were now fully alert. A few heads turned with subtle, synchronized interest. A woman in row 5 stopped mid-scroll on her phone and simply held a screen in her lap, gaze forward. Chloe tilted her head. "Ma'am, I'm the lead flight attendant on this flight. The pilot is currently finalizing preparations for takeoff." Veronica's face tensed. "Then I need to speak to someone with the authority to remove a passenger." And just like that, the tension snapped into the open. Chloe didn't move. She didn't answer right away, because she understood what was being said without it being said. Marcus did too. He slowly closed his laptop, not dramatically, not with defiance, but with quiet, deliberate control. He folded his hands over it and turned his body, just slightly, toward Veronica. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes met hers with the calm of someone who had seen this play before and already knew how it ended. Chloe cleared her throat. "Is there a specific concern you'd like to report?" she asked, carefully choosing each word. Veronica's chest rose and fell. She could feel it, the scrutiny, the disbelief forming around her. She could see the unspoken judgment in Chloe's eyes, in the faces peering at her from nearby rows. But she pressed on, because to back down now would be to admit that this wasn't about him. It was about her. "I don't feel safe," she said. For words, that was all it took. The phrase wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. It was a loaded sentence, designed to trigger protocol, to create urgency, to redirect power. Across the aisle, a businessman with a Bluetooth headset scoffed under his breath. "Here we go," he muttered. 2 rows behind, a teenage girl lifted her phone slightly. Not obviously, but just enough to start recording. And for the first time, Chloe's professionalism cracked. Not in her words, but in her posture. Her spine stiffened, her jaw clenched ever so slightly. "Ma'am," she said, low and careful, "are you saying you feel threatened?" Veronica didn't answer right away. She wanted to say yes. To claim that this man beside her, this black man, was making her feel unsafe, but she knew the risk. She knew that once she crossed that line, there would be no walking it back. So she took a different path, a more familiar one. "I'm not saying that," she said, her voice full of feigned grace. "I just don't feel comfortable. That's all." Her smile returned, but no one else was smiling. Chloe didn't nod. She didn't take notes. She simply looked at Marcus. And Marcus, still silent, looked back at Veronica. He didn't blink, didn't move, but his expression had shifted ever so slightly. Now, there was weight behind it. Sadness, maybe, or resignation, or perhaps a quiet knowing. The knowing that this moment wasn't about what he had done, but about what she wanted people to believe. And she could feel it now, the shift in the cabin. The sympathy she expected wasn't coming. People were watching her now with something closer to disbelief. And still, she couldn't stop. She gestured again toward Marcus. "Look, I'm just asking to be accommodated. I'm not trying to cause trouble. But if a passenger feels uncomfortable, shouldn't they be allowed to move?" Chloe's eyes narrowed, her professionalism now a thin shell. "We're full in first class," she said. "There are 2 seats available in coach. If you'd like one, I can arrange it." Veronica's lips curled in offense. "I'm not the one who should be moved." Chloe drew in a slow breath. "Just to clarify," she said, her voice low but resolute. "You want me to move Mr. Avery to economy because you don't want to sit next to him." Veronica didn't answer. Not immediately. She stared back, as if daring Chloe to say it again. Then with a cold, clipped tone, "Yes." And that was it. That was the moment. The moment when discomfort became discrimination, and the line between implication and accusation vanished. Marcus still hadn't said a word, but the cabin was alive with unspoken reaction. A soft gasp from the couple in 4A, a whisper from a college kid in a hoodie. The teenager's phone, still recording. Veronica felt her stomach twist, but it was too late now. She had crossed the line, and the world was watching. The air inside the cabin had turned dense, not with heat, but with a kind of silence that made people stop breathing for just a second. Veronica Hale sat ramrod straight, her hands folded in her lap, like a woman waiting for a verdict she expected to win. But the jury was everyone around her, and they weren't leaning in her direction anymore. Chloe stood still, her flight attendant tablet idle at her side. Her lips parted as if she were going to say something, but no words came. Her face wasn't shocked. No, not anymore. It was unreadable. Trained. But there was something behind her eyes. A flicker of disbelief. Perhaps, or something harder. Something like disgust. Across the aisle, someone cleared their throat deliberately. A scoff? Maybe. Veronica wasn't sure anymore what was real and what was paranoia. Because things were spinning. She could feel it, like a thread pulled too tight. The moment she said yes, she wanted to move. Something had shifted. She thought she was taking control. But now, she wasn't in control of anything. Her gaze flicked over Marcus, still silent, still watching her. His laptop was closed, hands calmly resting on top of it. His body turned slightly in her direction, not confrontationally, just enough to show that he was present. And then, for the first time since boarding the flight, he moved. His hand slid down, slow and smooth, to the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Veronica's throat tightened. She wasn't sure what he was reaching for. A wallet? A phone? Identification? Every muscle in her body tensed. And then she saw it, a small, slim leather badge case. He didn't open it right away. He simply held it in one hand, resting on his knee, still calm, still collected. But every passenger watching knew what it was. They'd seen enough movies, enough courtroom dramas, enough reality to know that this was not a prop. Chloe's eyes widened, but only slightly. Her composure stayed mostly intact, but she adjusted her stance, just a bit straighter, just a bit more alert. Veronica swallowed. "Is there something you'd like to report, ma'am?" Marcus asked finally, his voice smooth, deep, and terrifyingly steady. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to command every ear within 20 feet. Veronica blinked. She wasn't ready for that. He continued, slowly now, his words cutting with a kind of polite precision that stripped her bare. "Because if you feel unsafe and you believe I've done something to threaten you on this flight, a federal flight, I'd be happy to take your formal complaint." Then deliberately, he opened the badge case. FBI. The gold emblem caught the cabin light, gleamed like justice itself. Gasps didn't echo loudly, but they happened. A woman in row 5 visibly raised her eyebrows. A man 2 seats ahead exhaled a damn under his breath. The girl recording from behind zoomed in. The silence became a roar in Veronica's ears. Chloe took a slow half-step back, nodding once at the badge, not in surprise, but in recognition. She looked at Veronica, then back to Marcus. "Understood, Agent Avery," she said, the tone of her voice shifting instantly, from measured patience to respectful clarity. Veronica's mouth had gone dry. She could barely speak. Her words failed her, not because she was afraid, not exactly, but because now she was exposed. He wasn't just a passenger. He was federal law enforcement, and she had tried to get him removed, demoted, labeled a threat, all without cause, all on record. Veronica stared at the badge, then at his face, but he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was scanning the cabin now, almost casually, like someone trained in monitor rooms, trained to see things for what they really were. And what he saw in this moment was her unraveling. "You still want to move to coach?" he asked, evenly. She flinched. It was the first time she truly did. I didn't know," she started. He turned to her again. Calm, direct. "You didn't need to know. You just needed me to leave." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He didn't call her a name. But somehow, it cut deeper than if he had. The businessman across the aisle leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. The young woman behind them stopped pretending she wasn't recording. She now held her phone boldly, openly. The entire cabin was watching. Not just a woman who felt uncomfortable. Not just a man sitting quietly in his assigned seat. They were watching a reckoning. And Marcus? He didn't even blink. The badge didn't make a sound. It didn't need to. The moment Marcus Avery opened the leather case and revealed the gold-plated emblem of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, time in the cabin didn't just pause. It buckled. It gleamed under the cabin lights. Unmistakable. Official. Unarguable. Passengers who had been watching casually now sat up straighter. Those who had been whispering were now silent. Phones, once half hidden, were now out in the open. Every eye in first class shifted, not toward Marcus, but toward Veronica, because the game she'd been playing had just ended, and she had lost. Spectacularly. She stared at the badge as if it were a weapon, and in a way it was not one made of steel or bullets, but of truth. It was a shield she hadn't expected, hadn't accounted for. She had assumed silence was submission. She had assumed calm meant weakness. But now, she realized silence could be a choice, a strategy, and Marcus had waited until the exact right moment to strike, not with aggression, but with identity. The weight of who he was landed with devastating clarity. Chloe, the lead flight attendant, took a respectful half-step back. Her gaze shifted immediately, her entire posture recalibrating. There was no more neutral stance, no more performative patience. Just firm, practiced professionalism directed squarely at Agent Avery. "Understood, sir," she said, giving a small nod. "Do you need to escalate this further?" "No," Marcus said, voice even. "Not yet." He didn't look at Veronica. Not immediately. He took his time. He closed the badge case with a soft snap and placed it on the tray table. Then, slowly, he turned to face her, his eyes cool and measured. She couldn't breathe. "Ma'am," he began, his tone as calm as ever. "You said you didn't feel safe." Veronica blinked rapidly, her mouth opening, then closing. She couldn't find the words. He waited, Not to mock, not to trap, just to see if she'd say it again now. To his face. She didn't. I'm an FBI agent assigned to Federal Flight Security Investigations, he continued. If you believe I've done anything inappropriate, anything that jeopardized your safety or this flight, I'd be happy to take your official complaint. Right here, right now. Every syllable was deliberate, controlled, heavy. This wasn't a performance. It was a statement. Veronica's hands twisted in her lap. She couldn't meet his gaze anymore. Her eyes darted around the cabin, searching for an ally, for someone, anyone, to validate her discomfort. But no one met her gaze. Not the businessman across the aisle, who now shook his head and muttered, "Unreal." Not the young woman behind them, who was filming openly now, her phone angled with precision. Not even Chloe, who stood in silent solidarity with the truth that had just been laid bare. Veronica licked her lips, desperate for an exit that didn't exist. I mean that. It was just a misunderstanding, she said, her voice thin, brittle. Marcus didn't react. No smirk. No raised eyebrow. No satisfaction. That was what made it worse. Because he wasn't trying to humiliate her. He just wanted her to say it. Say that she was wrong. Say that she had lied. But she didn't. She couldn't. And everyone saw that too. The tension didn't explode. It sank into the walls, into the seats, into her chest. Heavy. Final. Marcus turned back toward his seat and opened his laptop. The case clicked softly. His fingers resumed their rhythm on the keys as if nothing had happened at all. But for Veronica, everything had happened. And it wasn't over. A chime rang as the intercom activated. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for a taxi. Flight attendants, prepare for departure. The voice of the pilot broke through the stillness, but no one moved. Not yet. They were still processing what they had just seen. Veronica tried to steady her breathing, her pulse still racing. But then, another sound, a notification ping. Her phone, then another, then 3 more. She reached into her tote, her fingers trembling. Screen on. Messages. Texts. Push alerts. Mentions. Is that you in the video? Veronica, please tell me this isn't real. Oh my God. I just saw what you did. Her heart dropped. She tapped Twitter. The app opened. And there it was. Trending. FBI agent confronts racist passenger. She clicked. The video was already viral. Just over a minute long. Captured from behind her shoulder. The badge. The confrontation. The moment her face froze. 67,000 views. No. 71,000. She refreshed again. 86,000. The caption read, "She tried to remove a black man from first class." He pulled out his FBI badge. Instant karma. Veronica's mouth went dry. There was no undoing it. The world had seen everything. Veronica Hale couldn't hear the engines anymore. The sound of the plane's acceleration, the gentle were the pressurized air, the wheels leaving the tarmac. It all faded beneath the pounding in her chest. Her phone vibrated again. And again. She didn't want to look. She already knew what she'd find. But her hand moved anyway, like muscle memory. Like a reflex. She tapped the screen. The notifications blurred together. Twitter mentions, message previews, push alerts from news outlets she hadn't even subscribed to. Woman tries to remove black man from first class. Turns out he's FBI. Instant karma caught on camera. FBI agent calmly shuts down racism in 60 seconds. She scrolled faster. 93,000 views. 112,000. A live counter ticked upward in real time. People were retweeting it with captions like, "White fragility meets federal authority. This is what accountability looks like." Sis really said, "I don't feel safe," and got outplayed. She pressed the side button on her phone and turned off the screen, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. And the worst part? The plane hadn't even reached cruising altitude. She turned slowly toward the window, hoping to disappear behind the thick glass. But the reflection staring back at her wasn't the woman she knew. Her foundation felt too heavy now. Her lipstick too precise. Everything she curated. Every inch of polish, poise and practice control, had crumbled into a symbol, a meme, a headline, a villain. She could feel it all around her. The shift. The woman 2 rows back was still recording, phone angled just enough to make it obvious now. The businessman across the aisle no longer looked curious. He looked disgusted. Even the flight attendants, moving quietly through the aisle with pre-takeoff checks, gave her just a little more distance, like she was a stain they couldn't touch. And then there was Marcus. He hadn't looked at her again. Not once. He sat still, laptop reopened, the soft tapping of keys resuming like nothing had happened. But that was the power move. He had moved on, and she couldn't. She pressed her hands into her lap, fingers clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her stomach twisted with a dull, rising nausea. She'd faced tough boardrooms, stared down egos twice her size. But this was humiliation, not whispered behind her back, but filmed, shared, uploaded, judged. Her phone vibrated again. A message from an old colleague she hadn't heard from in years. Please tell me this isn't you. Then another from a junior associate at her nonprofit foundation. Veronica, this is bad. They're talking about it in the press Slack. Her vision blurred. She wanted to cry, but not out of guilt, out of terror. She wasn't afraid of Marcus. She was afraid of what came next. Because this wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It wasn't a bad moment or a misread situation. It was a narrative, and she no longer had control over it. She tried to slow her breathing. Inhale, exhale. The plane dipped slightly as it leveled out in the sky. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers started to shift, loosen belts, lean back. Chloe returned to the aisle, smile tight, gaze flicking past Veronica, without stopping. Veronica opened her mouth to say something, anything, but no words came. What would she even say? I was uncomfortable. I didn't know he was FBI. She could almost hear the internet laughing at her already. The comments would be brutal. The remixes, the hashtags, the think pieces. And the irony? She had once chaired a panel on corporate responsibility in the age of digital accountability. She had warned others. One moment, one recording, and everything can change. And now it was her. She gripped the armrest and stared straight ahead, teeth clenched behind her still perfect smile. She hadn't moved an inch, but she felt like she was falling out of relevance, falling out of grace, falling out of the image she had spent decades constructing. She'd spent years believing in the power of appearances, believing that if you looked the part, dressed the part, spoke the part, you were safe. But now, a 90-second video had cut through it all like a knife. It didn't care how much money she raised, how many galas she hosted, how many committees had her name on the masthead. The world had seen her true face, or at least the one that mattered now. And Marcus? He never raised his voice. He never called her a name. He didn't need to, because the badge, the silence, and the truth had spoken for him. And now, Veronica was the only one still speaking, in her head, in her chest, silently screaming for a way out. But there was none. Not anymore. The plane's wheels touched down at Logan International Airport with a soft jolt. The passengers stirred to life. Seatbelts clicked open, overhead bins creaked, and phones lit up like a synchronized orchestra distraction. But while most people were checking hotel confirmations and Uber notifications, Veronica Hale was watching her digital obituary unfold in real time. The flight hadn't even reached the gate, and the number had already passed 200,000 views. She had stopped refreshing the video, because every time she did, the count was higher. Every time, the comments were sharper. Every time, she felt the noose of public opinion tightening. She adjusted her scarf in a futile attempt to conceal her face, an instinct born out of fear more than vanity. Her posture was no longer proud. It was defensive, folded inward, small. Meanwhile, Marcus Avery sat beside her with the calm of someone untouched by the storm. He was already typing an email, reviewing a case file, or maybe just pretending to. Either way, he hadn't glanced at her once since the badge, because for him, this was done. For her, it was just beginning. The intercom chimed. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Boston. We ask that you remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate. Thank you for flying with us." The words might as well have been in another language. Veronica wasn't listening. She was watching the airport terminal outside the window come into view, and with it, something she hadn't expected. Cameras. At first, it was just one, then two, then a full cluster. A woman in a Navy News blazer stood just beyond the glass, reading from her phone, eyes flicking up to the jet bridge with an expression of barely restrained excitement. "Oh no," Veronica whispered. She ducked slightly, pulling her coat collar higher. But it was too late. The video had reached critical velocity. Some reporter must have connected her face with her name. Maybe someone on board leaked the manifest. Maybe a Twitter sleuth did what Twitter sleuths do. Either way, the name Veronica Hill was out there, and now they were waiting for her. The moment the plane doors opened, the spell of silence broke. People stood. Luggage dropped from overhead bins. A few passengers gave Marcus a polite nod, an unspoken thank you wrapped in respect. Veronica waited for the rows ahead to clear, waited for someone to block the cameras. But no one did. Instead, when she finally stood and stepped into the aisle, a voice called out from the front of the cabin. "There she is." Her body jerked as if physically struck. Every part of her screamed to shrink, to run, to disappear. She stepped forward. The jet bridge felt too narrow, too exposed. When she exited into the terminal, the lights were blinding. Reporters swarmed like vultures scenting blood. "Ms. Hale, do you have a comment on the video? Were you aware the man was an FBI agent? Do you believe your actions were racially motivated?" Veronica raised her hand as if to push them back, not physically, but symbolically. "I have no comment. Please respect my privacy," she stammered. But the cameras didn't blink, and the live stream didn't pause. She broke into a stride, heels clacking across the tile, breath shallow, chest tight. She shoved through the crowd toward the exit, but then her phone buzzed again. A name appeared on the screen, James Rollins, chairman of the Marston Foundation. She knew what this was before she answered. Still, she swiped right and raised the phone to her ear. "James," she breathed. "Veronica." His voice was clipped cold. "I assume you're aware of the situation. I can explain." "No," he cut her off. "We've seen the footage. We've read the captions. We've read the comments." There was a pause. Heavy. Final. "The board met virtually 20 minutes ago," he continued. "We're asking for your resignation." Her stomach dropped. "James, please. This is being taken out of context." "The context," he said slowly, "is a woman trying to remove a black man from first class because she felt uncomfortable. That's not the kind of leadership this foundation can stand behind." She opened her mouth to argue, to beg, but the line went dead. He'd already hung up. Her hand dropped to her side, phone still clutched loosely. The reporters hadn't followed her all the way out, but the stares hadn't stopped. Airport travelers turned and whispered. Some pointed. One woman in a college hoodie said loudly enough for Veronica to hear, "That's the racist lady from the video." And that was the moment Veronica realized something chilling. No one cared what she had to say anymore. Not the foundation. Not the press. Not the strangers watching her name trend online. Her face had been recorded. Her words had been transcribed. And the internet had already made up its mind. There would be no PR spin. No carefully written statement. No redemption arc waiting in the wings. The story had been told, and she wasn't the hero in it. She wasn't even the villain with depth. She was just a cautionary tale. Veronica pulled her coat tighter, stepped to the curb, and hailed the nearest cab without looking up. The door shut behind her, but the story that would follow her long after the wheels started turning. Tuesday evening. A light drizzle streaked across the windows of the cab as Veronica Hale sat stiffly in the back seat, her coat still wrapped around her like armor. Her phone lay face down in her lap, buzzing periodically with texts, missed calls, and calendar alerts that no longer mattered. Outside, Boston moved on like it always did, unbothered, unaware of the emotional wildfire burning behind her carefully applied makeup. But inside that car, everything had changed, not for Marcus Avery. He was probably already at his next meeting, or maybe back at his office, reviewing briefs, prepping for a federal task force strategy call. Maybe he stopped for a coffee on the way and didn't think twice about what happened on Flight 279, because for him, it was just another Tuesday. But for her, this was the Tuesday she'd never forget. The Tuesday she lost her reputation. The Tuesday she lost the illusion of control. The Tuesday she realized that power built on appearances couldn't protect you when the truth was on tape. She hadn't looked at the video again, but she didn't need to. It was playing in her head on a loop. The way he had reached into his jacket, smooth and calm. The gleam of that badge. His voice measured, polite, devastating. "Would you like to file an official complaint, ma'am?" Her fingers clenched slightly in her lap at the memory. Not from anger, but from shame. She had always believed herself to be a good person. Someone who donated to causes. Someone who believed in diversity. Someone who voted for the right candidates. But one moment of discomfort had exposed a lie. She hadn't asked to see his boarding pass. She hadn't asked to understand who he was. She had just decided that his presence made her unsafe. Not because he did anything, but because he existed in her space, in her row, in her reality. And the world had seen it all. Veronica had turned the phone over. No new messages. Just the same 3 dozen she couldn't bring herself to open. One from her niece. "Are you okay? Why is everyone saying your name?" Another from her assistant. "Please advise if you wanted to respond to press inquiries." And from her husband, just 2 words. "We need to talk." The car pulled up outside her building. A sleek, modern condominium in Back Bay that used to feel like pride. Tonight, it felt like a spotlight. She hesitated before getting out. She knew the doorman would have seen the video by now. Knew her neighbors were probably watching from behind blinds, pretending they weren't staring. There was no escaping it. The internet didn't forget. And more importantly, it didn't forgive. She paid the fare and stepped out into the misting rain. No umbrella. No bags. Just shame clinging to her tighter than any coat ever could. She didn't see the camera in the apartment lobby, but she assumed it was there. Everything was always being recorded. Meanwhile, halfway across the city, Marcus Avery sat in a quiet booth in the back of a jazz bar he liked. He nursed a glass of club soda and scribbled notes into a small, leather-bound notebook. The bartender knew him by name. The band on stage played soft, horn-heavy blues. He had already forgotten her name. He didn't need to remember it. People like her showed up often enough in his life that they blurred together. Same stare, same assumptions, same discomfort. But he didn't carry them with him. He carried the badge, the work, the responsibility of being one of the few who saw everything clearly and had the power to do something about it. For him, it wasn't personal. It was Tuesday, back in her apartment. Veronica stood by the kitchen island, staring at her own reflection in the black screen of her mounted television. No headlines this time. Just herself, a woman with nothing left to say. Because no one was listening anymore. The final insult wasn't the fall. It wasn't the public shame. It wasn't even the resignation from the foundation. It was that the world moved on. Marcus did. The internet did. And she was left alone, clinging to the one moment she couldn't undo. The Tuesday that shattered everything. If the story made you think, made you feel something, or just reminded you that truth always finds a way, don't let it stop here. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to see it. Because this isn't just one story. It's part of a conversation we all need to keep having. And we're just getting started.